welcome to another episode of the Pastors Roundtable. I'm your host, Ryan Latham. I'm here with my friend Justin. And Justin, thanks for joining us on the show today.
Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate it, man. Appreciate all that you do. And I know this podcast is making a big difference for a lot of pastors. So thank you so much for your investment into so many different lives.
Yeah, absolutely. So just for some context, why don't you just tell us a little bit about your ministry journey, a little bit about who you are and what you're doing?
I grew up in a small town in Mississippi called Crystal Springs, Mississippi, about 20 miles south of the capital, Jackson. And preacher's kid, began to preach when I was about 13 years old in our youth group and things like that. Came to Bible college in Bethany, Oklahoma in 1999 and ended up working for a ministry right after that in their church planning and revitalization department. And then in 2008, a small town in Oklahoma, Purcell, just about 45 minutes south of Oklahoma City, called and asked me if I'd be interested in trying out to be their pastor. So pretty small congregation, and one of those things I wasn't sure. I loved what I did. I traveled and worked putting on church planning conferences and helped in a local church and loved it, but just felt like that's what God was calling me to do. And I was 27 years old, single at the time, and but I went down there and began to pastor and been there 12 years, and we've seen God do some incredible things over the last 12 years of the church, move locations, and just seeing some growth take place. And so anyway, just excited about kind of the journey of what God has taken us on the last 12 years.
Yeah, so tell us just a little bit about Purcell, a little bit, give us some context of just kind of the city itself.
It's a small town, about 6,000 people, and it's about 20 minutes south of Norman. Norman, I think, is probably the third biggest city in the state, so it's got a pretty good size city, pretty close to it. But it's a rural area, agriculture area. Actually, Purcell one time was called the quarter horse capital of the world. So a lot of ranches outside of Purcell, farming type stuff. And but anyway, just
now
great
is Purcell
people.
The one when I'm driving on the 35?
Yeah.
It has like this huge like shoeing school, like horse shoeing school. Is that Purcell?
That's just north of Purcell.
Okay.
So that whole area, though, a lot of ranchers, a lot of $1 million horses have come out of Purcell area. So I had no idea, because if you're driving down the interstate, you don't see the horse farms. You see that place and maybe one or two, but if you get out in the countryside, they're everywhere. So very agriculture, very rural, kind of just good old rural America type.
Some good old boys.
Exactly.
Now, Justin, for those guys that are watching the videos, is trying his best to wear some camo.
That's right. I got camo on today.
He told me at breakfast, he said, the boys, the guys don't consider him really a country boy. He said, but I got own camo.
That's right.
I said, I don't think the country boys consider what you're wearing to be camo.
Right. If you buy camo from H&M, it's not considered real camo. So that's I didn't get it at local tractor supply place or something.
Yeah, I don't think so. So you're not getting a lot of points on the camo.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. So tell us a little bit about your time at the district office. You were doing missions and all that kind of stuff. Tell us just a little bit about that story.
Yeah, I really had a great time working with church planners, just helping them, see kind of a vision of where they were going. So we worked with them before they planted the church. So we would put on church planting schools, and we would go to different cities and do these week-long schools. And so just really helping them get an idea of how they wanted to reach their community, raising funds, that kind of stuff. And then we also worked in revitalization, so worked with churches that needed to grow. So there was a whole process that we had. So the guy his assistant basically, he would go in and put on these conferences. And so anyway, we just really got to work with a lot of up-and-coming leaders, really enjoyed seeing them plant churches, work with them, help them become successful as reaching their community. So it's a really great time of growth.
Okay, so you work with a lot of church planners before they even start. So I know there's a lot of guys that are listening, watching right now that maybe have thought about it or maybe are in the midst of it. So just some tips for those that are thinking about church planning or maybe are in the midst of beginning to do their plant, some tips that you learned along that process.
I think one of the biggest things is knowing the area that you're wanting to plant the church, that before going into that area, spending some time there. Some of the most successful guys that I've seen do it maybe move to that area long before they actually plant the church, just to build relationships, get to know the area. I think any kind of model that you have, in my opinion, you need to filter it through where you're at, your location. And so
contextualization.
Exactly. Because of the way that we reach people it's funny, Purcell, Oklahoma is different than even 20 minutes up the road in Norman. Norman's a more urban setting and
college town.
Exactly.
OU.
Yeah, so we have to think about all those kind of things. How do we, how do we get this to work? So I think anybody that's planning a church, know your area, know your target. I mean, we obviously want to reach everybody, but many times you do have kind of a target audience. And so know that.
So with that, okay, so say I want to do a church plant. You're saying go in, spend some time. What am I looking for? What am I trying to gather in that process?
I think you gather what that community needs, what that area, maybe you're in a large city, but you're going to go to a certain area, a certain suburb, or find out what that looks like. Even, it's funny, if you go to big cities in America, different communities in that, they may even have their own dialect, their own slang. I mean, the way that they say things and deal with things are different even in the context of a major city. So just figure out what is it that works in this community, how do we reach people. I think that's something very major. And so anyway, just kind of, I think, figuring out where you're at, where God has called you to be, and what that looks like in that area. I think it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, that's great. Now, what about, you talked about fundraising, that kind of stuff. So what were some tips there on fundraising?
Obviously, most people go straight to hit up their family and friends. I mean, it's kind of like, let's go ask them first. But one of the things I think is just building relationships in the community where you're at, and finding some people that maybe they haven't been a part of a church for a while, but they're looking to help, that they have a vision. And there's people, I believe, we never want to take from other churches, and I get that, but there are certain people that God has blessed. And I believe that, I know several families that they literally love helping churches get started. So that's kind of their vision. Like, we want to help you get started until you're up and going, and then we're going to move on to help somebody else. So I think just finding some connections, some relationships with people that's their calling to do that, and then knowing what you're trying to do. I think so many times we ask for money and people want to know, what am I giving toward? And if you don't have an idea, if you can't tell them this is the vision, then they're more than likely not going to jump on board. They'll jump on board with vision. So I think it's important just to know this is how we're going to reach this community. This is what we're called to do. And when you spell that out, a lot of times people can see it. The scripture says, write the vision and make it plain, that those that run can run with it. So they know, they can see the path. And so I think it's important just to have an understanding of what you're doing. Maybe if you're going to a community, you're saying, we're going to try something different than other churches, and being able to just articulate that and explain it.
Those are great. That's great advice. So you recently were married?
Yes.
What,
yes.
about a little over a year ago?
A little over a year, October, year ago, and then found out in March we were going to have a little baby, and have Mr. Benjamin was born December 4th. So it's easy for me to remember. My wife's birthday is September 4th. Mine is November 4th, and his is December 4th. So we stuck with the theme of fours. So
there you go.
I can easily remember his birthday, but
that's good.
He's growing, healthy little boy, 8 weeks old right now, and so we're still trying to get sleep. That's something. Sleep is very precious right now, and so he has slept through the night sometimes. Actually, when I was taking care of him recently because my wife wasn't feeling well, he slept through the night, woke up once. When my wife took over, he woke up the next time 6 times in 7 hours. Oh. So anyway, I think he feels sorry for his dad and says,
yes,
he's like, I don't know how this guy's going to do with me, so I'm just going to sleep.
That's awesome.
But anyway, he's a huge blessing. My favorite thing is just when he wakes up, he's in a good mood. Watching him, getting him to smile and spend time with him, it's a great blessing.
Yeah. So you started your ministry as a single guy.
Yes.
Working at the district office, and even as a church planner,
Yeah.
or actually revitalization,
Yeah,
you called, or
uh-huh.
Talk about that just as a single pastor, right?
Yeah.
What was that like?
It's interesting because over the years, having to kind of change once you get married and have kids. I can honestly probably say I was a better pastor in some ways, single, in the sense that when I say better, maybe that's not the best term, but I think what I mean by that is there was a lot of things I could focus on. People would call and say, could you be a part of this event? Could you do this? And I wouldn't have to call and ask anybody and see if we had something going on. I could look at my calendar and make my own decisions. And so I was able to focus a lot on the church. I mean, it was basically my entire life. And so, I think even Paul says that, talks about, those that when you get married, you have to give yourself to your family, which you should. So it's been a dynamic watching a change as I've gotten married and had kids.
Yeah, the thing that's interesting is, even in that scripture, it talks about, like, if you're weak,
Right, right.
It's like
Right.
if you can't handle it,
Right,
then
right.
get married, right?
Right.
And okay, so maybe this is totally off topic, but I think sometimes we almost make it almost as if you're not married,
Right.
and especially if you're not married in ministry,
Right.
that like you've missed it.
Sure.
That like, oh man, are you really able to be in ministry if you're married? I mean,
Right.
maybe you got something.
Sure. One of the things, it's interesting around the church when we're hiring a staff member or something, I've had people come and say, well, are they married? And it's almost like they assume they have to be. And I remind them, I youth pastored about 20 years ago, but I youth pastored single. I was a lead pastor single. And so, I just reminded them, you remember when I came into this, matter of fact, I was single, for the most of the time, the 12 years, I've been single for most of it. So just reminding them of that. I love being married. My wife is incredible, and I love having a helpmate, and she helps out, just around the church, and then we're a team around the house and all that kind of stuff. I love being married, but when it comes to pastoring, I can see where a single person can give themselves in ways, and I encourage anybody, don't get married unless you feel like that's what God is calling you to do. I don't think singleness. I think we've made this idea that singleness is almost a stain on somebody's life, and that's not true at all, man. Singleness is a great thing. It's a beautiful thing, and I think if that's what you're called to do, just keep enjoying it, do it, spend time with people, and enjoy the freedom that you have to be able to do those things. It's not. I think in church we've made it where you have to be married, and I'm a big proponent. Matter of fact, several of our staff members are single because I just tell people, look, they're doing what they're called to do, and I think it's a blessing.
Yeah, I had a professor in college who she was like, I am called to being single. I mean, it was like a calling that she really walked in and felt like this isn't a thing like the Lord hasn't provided.
Right.
I was like, no, like I'm called to this.
Right.
And she just walked in and was really confident in that. And so I think that's just a good word. So let's take a step back. At breakfast you shared, and even you've come to our church and shared your story. There was a season where there was some hard, tragic time in your life, and so can you just tell us that story, and then let's just kind of dive into that for a little bit here.
Once again, I found myself single and pastoring, and the church was doing great at the time. We had moved to a new building, was growing, everything was good, but I did want to have a family, want to be married, and so just kind of began to say, okay, Lord, if you want me to be married, I don't know where I find a pastor's wife. I mean, where do you go looking for a pastor's wife at? So, I guess nobody should go to the club. I always make the joke that you don't go to the club and ask, but anyway, where do you find it? I always, this is kind of corny, but I had one pickup line. Hey, baby, you want to come back to the parsonage? That was kind of my one pickup line. But anyway, didn't work very well. And so, it's one of those things where I just felt like, so a young lady began to attend our church, and so we met, and it was one of those things. It just felt like it was what God had answered that prayer, and so we ended up getting married in November of 2014. And it's funny because at the time I was 33, and I felt like 33 was old. And so because of that, we decided to go ahead and try to have kids, right away, not wait. And so by January, we were pregnant. And so we had gone in January of 2015 to have an ultrasound, just to hear the heartbeat of the baby like you do, not really to see anything, just kind of to hear the heartbeat, to see what all was going on. And so we went in for that procedure, or went in for the ultrasound, and they said we can't hear a heartbeat. That was on a Friday, and they told us you've had a miscarriage and the baby is no longer alive. And so it was obviously devastating. I mean, just because we were just excited about that, thinking 2015 was going to. I remember I got up at the end of 2015, the last Sunday or 14, to announce about the baby and everything. So I said, 2015 is going to be this amazing year, and all this stuff is ahead of us, not knowing what was really ahead. And so anyway, we ended up, that was on a Friday, found that devastating news. On Wednesday, had to go in for a procedure. It's called a DNC. You had to go in for that. And so went in for the DNC, and the doctor came out and said, everything's good. Come back in 3 weeks and see me. Everything's fine. But you can go back there and see your wife in the recovery room. So me and her mom walked back there, and immediately something was wrong. Her body was seizing up. and they put her on. They tried to give her anti-seizure medicine, and nothing would help. So they ended up putting her on like a basically in self-induced coma, or not self-induced, but put her in a coma, medically induced. Yeah, thank you, coma. And so people began to pray and just really, cry out and just really believe that, we were praying for her healing. That was on a Wednesday, and people started coming to the hospital, visiting. Never forget, on Saturday there was about 70 people in the waiting room.
Wow.
But anyway, 4 days later she passed away. So we'd been married 12 weeks to the day. She passed away. And then in between that, my mom, who had served faithfully as a pastor's wife for over 40 years and just an amazing woman of faith, she had ovarian cancer and had been battling that for about 2 years. And so through that whole process, that for the next few weeks, I would go back home. I'm an only child. So I would go home and try to help take care of her, come back, preach on the weekends, do that kind of thing. But 8 weeks later, she passed away. So in 9 weeks' time, I lost a child, my wife, and my mom. So, excuse me, I'm going to get a drink of water.
Oh, man.
So it was very, obviously, a very devastating time, a very difficult time. Something you're really never prepared for. Something that I don't, growing up in church, and hearing stories about God bringing people through things, and, always believed that kind of stuff, but never really had anything like that happen to me. And it was one of those things for me that I really realized later on. It's kind of funny. There's a Mumford & Sons song, and it says, "Hold on to what you believe in the dark." And basically what the Lord kind of showed me for me was that all my life in the light, He had been teaching me what it was to hold on to Him. Hebrews says that hope is the anchor of our souls, both sure and steadfast. And so really, in the light, God had been teaching me how to anchor myself to Him. And when the darkness came, I was able to hold on. And I was able to, there was days I would wake up and didn't know why I was even alive anymore. For me, my wife had a son as well from a previous marriage. And so I was helping raise him. And he went to be raised by his grandparents. He was still in my life every other weekend, still is, but it was one of those things where I went from having a house that had, people there and movement and all this stuff to being by myself totally again. And so if it wasn't for the goodness and the grace of God during those times, it took me, I told you at breakfast, it took me about 1.5 years to come out from under the fog of it. It was almost like I'd walk around like a zombie in a lot of ways. But thankfully the church kept loving me through that and allowed me to pastor through that.
Yeah. So, here you are, a single guy, even 33, right? So, there had to have been some times, I'm assuming, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but
Sure.
I just have friends that are getting that age,
Right.
that are thinking, man, why don't I have a spouse? Why don't I have, right? They're questioning that, am I called to sing? Am I ever going to get married, right?
Sure.
So I'm sure there was moments of where you had that, right?
Oh, yeah.
Then you get married.
Right.
And 12 weeks later.
Right. Yeah.
You're walking through this.
Right, and I think the thing is, you think you do things the right way as far as, you wait to find the right person, and then you get married, and, and growing up, I felt like there was times we were taught not to question God, but the truth is, I think God's big enough to handle our questions. There was times that I would find myself screaming on the floor, just, God, why? It's one of those things, I don't always know the answer to all those questions, maybe here on earth, but the truth is I can see out of this how it's helped me to minister to people in ways that I couldn't before. Didn't have empathy. I would sympathize with people, but I had no context of what they were going through. And just realizing that God has allowed our church to be a place of healing, not, we believe in physical healing, but really just healing people's hearts, that people come to our church that have gone through things. And it's the kind of thing where I never tell people I know what you're going through, because every situation is different.
Yeah.
But at the same time, just saying, I know what it is like to lose something like that. But I can say now, 5 years later, that one of the scriptures, let me back up, one of the scriptures that God gave me, I actually read this at my wife's funeral. So it was like within days of this happening, I found this in Job. And I told you before, I hated the book of Job before this happened.
I think many people do.
Yeah, it's kind of depressing. Who wants to read about some dude losing everything, you know? And so, but in Job, I think it's 23, he says, I look one way, God, and I don't see you. I look another way and I don't see you. I look at my right and my left, I can't see you anywhere. And I felt that way many days. I mean, I'm pastoring people. I'm getting up on Sundays and preaching about faith, but I'm still like, God, I don't always feel you. But Job says, but he knows the way that I take. And when I've come through this, I'll come out pure as gold. And I had to hold on to that God, even when I didn't know where I was at, you know where I was at. And it was that promise that kept me going. One of the mantras that I had during the time, and somebody gave me something from my office that has this, but I would say, I choose joy.
Wow.
And joy had to be a faith choice every day, that I had to wake up and choose joy. Joy wasn't something that was always evident, but I had to make a choice to choose joy. And yeah, it's like, you wait all these years to get married. God, why did it happen? And once again, I don't always know the answer, but I can say from that, my ministry to people has grown stronger.
That's great.
Through that.
So talk to me a little bit about, you talked about that, the difference between like sympathy, understanding, and empathy.
Right.
Talk to me about that. I mean, it's just much deeper levels of connecting with people and how
Sure.
that's, unpack that a little bit, and then how's that helped you?
Well, I think, before, I mean, if somebody loses somebody, you feel sorry for them. I mean, you genuinely are sad for them. But you're not necessarily moved emotionally in a way. And the Bible says when Jesus looked out on the crowds, he was moved with compassion. And I think empathy is the kind of thing to me where I feel like now when somebody goes through something, I mean, once again, I genuinely felt sorry for them before. It wasn't like just a passing, sorry that happened type thing. But now it is this thing where you almost feel it in your gut kind of thing. It's like, I don't know how else to describe it.
Is it almost like you relive a piece of that moment?
Well, I mean, yeah, I think in more than anything, you remember the feeling of loss. When my mom passed away, I didn't live around my parents for 16 years because I had moved to Oklahoma, but I could talk to my mom every day on the phone. I'm unashamedly a mama's boy. I love talking to my mom on the phone. And, whenever she passed away, I never forget, I went on a trip right after that, flew in, and she was always the first person I'd call at the airport. Hey, made it back safe. And I picked up my phone to call, and, nobody. And it's one of those kind of things where now when somebody loses a parent or loses a spouse, it's one of those things where there are times I'll tell them those kind of stories just to say, once again, not that I know exactly what you're feeling, but I understand where you're at. And you have a understanding that you didn't have before. You have that, so you have almost a way of helping them hopefully navigate things because you've been there. And that's my whole thing. If I'm going to go through something like that, I wanted it to be able to make a difference for other people. If I'm going to have to go through that, I want it to be something that other people are able to learn from.
Yeah. So how is that? I mean, you talked about how it's helped you in the church too.
Sure.
That must have been just tough days. You're going home, and Monday through Saturday, it's down.
Sure.
And you're having a hard time. But then on Sunday, right, you got to come up and you got to be the pastor, right? So how'd you navigate that time, being real,
sure,
being authentic,
right,
but still leading? So
right.
how'd you lead through that time?
I think for me, one of the things I didn't want to hide what I was going through. I think sometimes as pastors, we can, we don't want people to know maybe the struggle because we don't want to be vulnerable, whatever reason, we don't want to be used against us or whatever the reasoning behind it is. But it's one of those things where I felt like I needed to grieve publicly, that part of my healing was being able to, and help other people see this. So, whether it was working into sermons or just, in conversations, but I was very public about what I had dealt with. And I would say there are times that there was times I didn't know if I even wanted to live, not saying anything extreme with that, but there was just days I woke up and say, Lord, why am I even alive? What's the purpose of me even being here? And so I was public with that kind of stuff. Once again, I didn't it wasn't like every single sermon was that, but I would, glimpses, exactly. I think that's important for people to know, and to be part of that journey. I saw people that felt like one of the images that a friend of mine told me about was from the Old Testament. In the Old Testament, when somebody grieved, they would go sit in the ashes with them. They wouldn't necessarily say anything. They would just go sit in the ashes. And that helped me so much. I told people publicly, I don't need you to have the right answers for me. I just need you to sit in the ashes with me. And so there were people that text me from time to time and say, I'm sitting in the ashes with you. It was just that idea of, I'm here with you. And that's what I needed. And it helped me because I think before as a pastor, I always felt like I had to have the right answers. And, you go to the hospital and somebody passes away and you've got to be able to explain theologically what's going on. And I've realized through this, people don't need, they don't need answers. They just need somebody to stand there by them and say, man, this stinks. I love you. I'm sorry you're going through this. We're going to do this together. And so understanding that kind of helped me as far as leading people. And then publicly, like I said, I still had wanted to have sermons of hope and faith and all of that. But there were times just saying, this is what I've struggled with, and maybe you relate to this. And I think weaving that into your messages, leading through something like that, one thing, it helped me to heal, but it also helped us as a church to go through this together.
I bet it just made you so much more relatable to your people. And that's something that it's obvious, right? You told me when you first got to the church, about 40 people, right. This town of 6,000 people. Here you are 12 years later. And I want to dive into this for a little bit. Now you're at about 400 or so. Right. Just recently went to 2 services. Right. That's got to be just a big part of what you could say, quote unquote, your success, is the fact that you are able to relate to people on such a deeper level, and that you are real and you're authentic, and that you're vulnerable, right? You've led through this time. I'm assuming that the church was just, I saw on social media, right. It seemed like the church was just ecstatic when you got remarried.
Sure.
And just ecstatic when you find out, man, here comes your child.
Right.
And at the birth of your child, it just feels, I got the sense, just having known you from kind of afar and social media, that there's this sense of it's not just a church celebrating their pastor, but it's like our son, it is like this redemption moment in your life. Right. So I don't know, just unpack that for me a little bit.
No, that's one of the things I held on to, that God was going to restore things, that I believe that God, reading in Job one day, God restored to Job, and I feel like God said, I'm going to restore to you everything that you've lost. And so part of that, it took me about 3 years to get to a place to where I was prepared to, be married again and date and that kind of stuff. But it was amazing. I told you at breakfast in January of 2018, I began to really, say, okay, Lord, it's been 3 years. I'm ready to date again. Can you help me out? Once again, I'm coming back to you because I don't know where to find a pastor's wife again. And so,
if it worked once,
exactly. That was in January. Within March, I'd met a young lady through some mutual friends, and
all right, Justin, you need to start like a pastor's dating, because you got these like a miracle timelines of Lord, I want, and you just
Well, I thought about trying pastorsonly.com, but
either your prayer life is awesome or you're on to something here. Right, I'm not sure which one it is.
Maybe I need to look into that. I tried to figure out something. I tried pastors only, but I'm the only one that signed up, so we ended up canceling that. It was amazing, and it's amazing that when God does things, I believe He does things well. And when He brought Sarah into my life, my wife that I married just a year ago, it was just amazing how He knew exactly what I needed, what the church needed, and he did. And the church has celebrated that. The church has watched us watch the redemption take place. And you're right. The church celebrated us being married. It's been an incredible thing. And thankfully, my wife, Sarah, she understands everything I've gone through. So as far as wanting me to be able to get my story out there, to be able to help other people, part of that. And then when Benjamin was born, I had somebody yesterday make a joke about he needs a little blue check mark by his name on Instagram. Because I tell him all the time, he's 8 weeks old, but I say, buddy, you are loved. And he really is. He's loved by so many people. And I think a lot of that is because people have watched from afar. Some of them very close, but they've watched. And I had a lady over in the UK on Twitter the other day, never met her, don't know anything about her. She just made the comment. She said, I've watched your story from, whatever other country, thousands of miles away. And it's amazing to see. And I had no idea somebody in another country like that even knew who I was or what was going on. But she just commented and said, I've watched your story and I love the redemption that's taking place. So I want my story to be a story of hope, that God's not done with your story yet. No matter what it is, it could be a loss. It could be just mistakes you made. We have a lot of recovery ministry at our church. We just opened up a women's center so we've got right now 11 women that live there. It's a 8-month, a year-long program that deals with drug and alcohol addiction and other addictions as well in their life. And so we're a big church of second chances, of hope, that God's not done with you yet. And I just want my life to be a testimony of that whether it's a loss in your life or it's a mistake you made, that God's not done. His grace and His mercy is there to help you get through it.
I think social media gets a bad rap all the time.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
It's so many negatives. But isn't it awesome how you've been able to leverage, not intentionally,
Right.
very unintentionally,
Right.
just being real and authentic with your journey and your story, how that you didn't even know
Sure.
is blessing people around the world, literally.
Right. Yes. Yeah. I do think social media, obviously, it's the kind of thing. It's neutral. It can be good, be used good or bad. It just depends on what you choose. You can be positive on there. You can, be negative and cause division and all those kind of things. But I do think it's when we do leverage and use it for the right reason, to glorify God. And honestly, my personality, I'm kind of a jokester. I have weird stuff comes in my head all the time. I use social media just as an outlet to be goofy, to be honest, because I just want to be real with people. Obviously we use it for good reasons too, but I think there's so much negativity in the world. I think the world, a lot of times I'll post pictures of Benjamin laughing and just say, you need a smile on your timeline today, kind of thing. And people connect with that. And Sarah was laughing just last night. I videoed him laughing and smiling and put it on there. And she said, this boy's got 100 likes in 10 minutes, kind of thing. But I think it's because people, they love to see, number one, they love to see happiness and joy, happening for others in a lot of ways. But then also, I'm thankful that people have walked through this with me, and I want them to be in His life, because I want them to be able to celebrate all that God has done. I'm thankful for that.
Yeah, so good. So, Purcell. Okay, smaller town, 30 minutes, or what would you say, about 15, 20 minutes outside of Norman.
Yes.
Norman's not a huge city.
Right.
It's kind of a suburb of Oklahoma City. So it's kind of a suburb of a suburb of a, so basically it's a small town.
Yes.
6,000 people, you go in, 40 people. Over the last 12 years, you've done some amazing things, not just in your church location, but as a part of the whole city. Talk about some of the things that you've done, some of the groups that you're a part of, because you see yourself as much more than just a pastor of a local church,
right.
But you're part of not just even, you were telling me it's not even just Purcell,
right.
But that
right.
it's your community, because you've got people that drive in from other cities to come. So talk about some of the things that you're doing, some of the groups that you're involved with.
Right. Well, in rural Oklahoma, or probably rural America, but you have your county seats. I guess not just rural, but anyway, but especially when you go to out in the country areas, you have your county seat. So it tends to be kind of a place where people go for work or go grocery shopping, whatever that. And that's what Purcell is, kind of a regional area. We're in a county called McLean County, but then right across the river from us is Lexington, which is about 2 miles over. And it's a small community of about 2,500 in Cleveland County. And then you've got Washington 10 minutes from us, which probably has 700 or 800 people. Then you got a small town of Wayne. So we're regionally located. So we have people from all the schools. Our youth pastor has to go to multiple football games or basketball games, because we have kids from every school represented many times. And so it is kind of a regional area. But I'm big on... let me say this correctly. I didn't set out to be the community pastor or whatever. That wasn't like I try to do that for attention. But I've come to find out that a lot of pastors are just almost intimidated or nervous, or they feel like I'm just called to my flock or whatever, my group, my church. I'm right here and nobody else. But I think God has called us to have influence. I really believe if a local church is doing what it's supposed to do in the community should be uplifted. I believe that we should be involved in helping crime go down and employment go up. And I believe that, the kind of the lift of the city. And so for us, we believe in that. So we started years ago when we had about 60 to 80 people. We started a back to school event. We give out free school supplies. And we used to do it on the corner of our old church, blocked off the city or the streets and did it. We now partner with the Chamber of Commerce, so we do it in downtown Purcell. So they let us on the first Saturday in August, they let us block off the city streets, and we bring in, all kinds of climbing walls and stuff for kids to do, games. And
Okay, but talk about that, because you needed permission to block off the streets.
Right.
Which for the average youth or pastor, right, or that's kind of hard thing. Well, who do we even talk to? We got to talk to the mayor. We got to talk to the man. But you just casually had a conversation because you were involved in this group, the chamber, you said?
Well, at this point, that thing, we're part of the Chamber of Commerce, but also the Rotary Club, which is just a civic, most towns are going to have the Rotary, Lions, Kiwanis.
But you didn't need to try to find him,
to get
to a schedule, try to introduce yourself. You had already been consistently involved.
Right.
So you just casually.
Yeah, I just talked to the city manager one day and said, hey, we were at our older location then, and I said, hey, we had 15 parking spots. That was our church. It was landlocked. And so I just went up to him at Rotary one Wednesday and said, hey, can we block off the streets for what I want to do? And he said, well, let's go look at it, because he wanted to make sure it wasn't interfering with anything. But he looked at it and said, yeah, sure. And so from that, we've been able to build relationships where, with different people within the community. And I think being involved in those groups is important. It's really just relationships. I didn't set out. I've been the Rotary president actually twice in 12 years and the Chamber of Commerce president, but I didn't set out to do any of that. It's just kind of building relationships and being there, and people see your willingness and your faithfulness. And then honestly, most places are looking for help. We're always looking for volunteers in the church. And these civic groups are always looking for somebody to volunteer. And, you might not can do everything, but if you can show up and say, hey, whatever you're doing, I'll help out with this, I think people will begin to see your seriousness about it. And a lot of times they'll ask you to be a part of the leadership of it even.
Yeah, it's being involved in those. You're also on the hospital board, right?
Yeah.
You were the Citizen of the Year one year.
Yeah.
And so just being involved in those little things. And so when you do have, it's that bank account principle, right? Like you're making all these investments in, and then when you want to make a withdrawal, can we block off the city?
Right.
They're saying, sure.
Right.
We know you, we trust you, we believe in you. It came around again when you guys wanted to open the Hope Center, right?
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about that story. Because you said people are emailing you, calling you. How'd you raise the money?
Right.
How'd you get this done? And the answer, again, comes back to your long relational investments.
Right. Well, one of the things for us, because of Rotary, I sat by a district judge or by one of our judges for 12 years I've been in Rotary, and I'm always very careful. I will say this to anybody building those relationships: I don't set out to build relationships to manipulate anything. I'm very careful about that. The police chief was my neighbor, and he goes to our church, and I don't, if I was ever to get pulled over, I don't call him and say, hey, can you get me out of a ticket, kind of thing. I'm very careful about, because I don't want them to feel used and that kind of stuff.
It's not a strategy that you set out to say, well, I'm going to do this move to this move to this move,
right,
and
exactly.
I'm going to network with this person, this person. You just want to be involved.
Exactly.
And
right.
through that has opened up these doors.
Right, exactly. So our district judge goes to Rotary, and I talked to her one day, and I said, look, told her kind of what we're doing with the Hope Center, and she said, we desperately need something like that. We'll work with you. So Oklahoma is, at one time, I think it's changed a little bit, but very recently it led the nation and really led the world in the incarceration of women. So more women were incarcerated in Oklahoma than anywhere in the world. And so, just trying to figure out how can we make a difference. We have 3 men's group, 2 what they call sober living houses, and 1 rehab center that attend our church, but nothing for women. And so I met a friend of mine that started a thing called Hope Center Ministries. And so the thing was we were going to raise $100,000 to help them. They come in, buy the property. They actually run it. The girls, the agreement is the girls go to our church. They bring their families. So it's us being able to minister to their families. And then they do a few things, clean our church and that kind of stuff. But anyway, so we were partnering with them, but we had to raise $100,000. Well, I'm from a small town.
So now, what size is your church at this point?
At that time, we were probably running about 250.
So 250, small town.
Right.
$100,000.
Right, and we're not a church that is, the Lord blesses us, but we're not super wealthy. Once again, we deal with a lot of people in recovery that maybe don't have employment, that kind of stuff. So the funny part was they asked me, how long will it take you to raise the money? And I said, well, do you want a faith goal or a realistic goal? And he said, well, what's your faith goal? And I said, probably 6 months. And he said, the guy said, I think he thought I was going to say like, a couple months. And I said, but realistically, probably a year. This was in March of 2019. So I said, it'll probably take us, a year to do it at the end of March. And he said, okay, I can tell you that wasn't the answer he wanted. But my first place to go was to the Rotary Club. And I didn't preach a message. I just talked about how we can make a difference in our community, and how a lot of times we find the problems in our community, but we don't necessarily are willing to be the answers or the part of the solution. So I said, how can we be part of the solution? I said, some of you in here, I didn't ask people to raise their hands, but I said, some of you have dealt with family members, kids, grandkids, nieces, nephews, whatever, that have been addicted to drugs. How can we make a difference? And so I just threw the idea out there. Nobody said a word to me there about it. I mean, they said, great idea. Nobody said anything. But a couple of days later, got a call from one of our local businesses and got 2 checks equaling $10,000. And that was the people who don't attend our church. It was strictly just, we want to be a blessing to what's going on. And it began to catch on. And within 6 weeks' time, we raised $100,000. So by the end of March, by the beginning of May, we had all the money raised for our Hope Center.
Now that's blessing the community, right?
Yes.
Now you're also involved in recovery group.
Yeah.
You go out and speak there Monday nights.
Yeah.
And you bring those people in too.
Yes, yeah, they bring, it's a rehab center called Rob's Ranch. It's pretty well known in Oklahoma, a 90-day treatment facility for men. And so they do a great job. I've been going out there about 6.5 years on Monday nights, and they bring the guys that for the first 60 days, they don't have passes. So for the first 60 days, they bring the guys that are there. So it kind of always rotates. But we have that group that comes to one service. We've got another mittens group, and then, like I said, and then the girls come to our second service and bring their families. A couple weeks ago, we baptized 6 of the girls, and then the cool part of that was one of them has 2 boys that wanted to get baptized. They've been coming to church, so we were able to baptize a mom and 2 boys. So a family is getting baptized. So through that.
So the church is growing. You've gone from 40 to 50. At what point? Oh, and at one point, you guys even started outgrowing your original building,
right,
and had to move. So talk about that moving process, what that was like.
Yeah, one thing I'll say that I've learned over the years, because I'm a very driven person. I want things to happen quickly. Patience is not my favorite word, but I've learned when it comes to the things of God, and really that timing is everything. And we outgrew our building, and we couldn't get any bigger. And people were trying to beg us to build, go build, go build. But I didn't feel like I didn't have a clearance, really feel like that's what we're supposed to do. So we prayed about it, and there was a building in town that a friend of mine pastored, but they were in a place where they were looking to kind of, I didn't know it at the time, but they were just at a place where the mortgage was, kind of a lot, that kind of thing. And so they were looking to switch. And somebody told me, hey, they may be willing to do this, but I didn't want to call them. I felt like if it's what God wants, they're going to contact us. And so I'll never forget one day, we were having a women's event, and his wife was actually catering the meal. And he called me, and I thought it was about that. And I answered the phone, and I said, hey, we got to get you a check so you guys can get the food. And he said, what are you talking about? And I said, well, I thought you were calling me about that. And he said, no, I wanted to know, are you interested in buying our church? And I almost veered off the side of the road, because I've been driving by that church for a year, praying about it. So we went from a place that would hold 120 with 15 parking spots to 5.5 acres, a church that holds 300. We have stadium seats. I think it's kind of a weird number, 284 stadium seats. But then with chairs we bring in, we can hold about 300 in there. And so, our facility more than doubled the potential to be able to do things there. And so it was just amazing how God's timing was there, that we didn't get ahead. We didn't try to, just push. We just waited, and God's timing was perfect in that. And so we've grown from that. So we started there, we had about 100. And this past Sunday, we reached a goal for a non-special event Sunday. It wasn't Easter, Christmas, that kind of thing, and we had right at 400, I think like 402 or something like that. So.
I heard people say that we're often really good at hearing God's voice, but not really good at hearing God's timing.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. Yeah.
So yes, we want a new building.
Right.
Yes, we want to open a new campus. Yes.
Right.
Okay, but when?
Right.
So when? So then you go to this new building, you start growing there.
Right. Yeah.
And you start hitting lids there. So
Yeah.
I love what you talked about. You're an extrovert.
Yeah.
You love people.
Right.
You love hanging out with people. And so talk about going to 2 services and what that was like and your experience there.
Yeah. I'm one of those kind of odd people that I like. If somebody mentions somebody's name, like, oh yeah, they're related to so and so. I mean, I can tell you, I didn't grow up in our area, but I'm just kind of weird like that. I love people's stories, hearing, and so as we've grown, it's been hard for me because I don't know everybody's name. I mean, I don't even know everybody's name, but I don't know everybody's stories. I don't know all that, and I've had to be careful because I know if I do things the way I want it, it really will hold us back from what God has for us. Because I'm very relational, and I want to keep it a certain area. I mean, a certain size, so I can know all that. And so, as when the Hope Center was coming in, the buddy of mine that actually he does church consulting too, that started the Hope Center, he told me, I'm not going to let you have a Hope Center unless you're going to go to 2 services. He said, I know you won't be able to hold it, and I'm thinking, man, I mean, you're putting a lot of pressure on me. But he was right. He told me you'll never break 300 unless you go to 2 services in your facility. Because we would get up to 280, go down to 230, get up back and forth. And so in September, we went to 2 services because the Hope Center was opening in November, wanted to get things ready. And so went to 2 services. And I'll tell you about that part in a moment as far as the feeling of it. But he was right. I mean, since then, there's been a very few Sundays we've had had under 300, and so the 2 services has been just a great for us. But for me personally, everybody prepared me for the practical part. Get extra volunteers, make sure you got parking, prepare yourself to preach twice. I mean, all of that kind of stuff, all the stuff that they teach you. I was ready for all of that. We had that stuff ready. I wasn't ready emotionally. Nobody told me. And so I'm texting friends of mine that have multiple services afterwards, and they're like, great job. How did it go? And even some of them, I'm like, why didn't you tell me? And they're like, what are you talking about? And I said, I was literally almost depressed that night because not everybody was in the same room together.
Yeah, I think you said, someone asked you, how did it go? And you said, it went great. I'm depressed.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it was. And I literally, because not everybody was together, and it was so hard for me because, we just didn't have the same dynamic of everybody in the room. But the awesome thing is as we've begun to grow, the room's filling up, and I see the need, so I understand that. But I think for me, I had to get used to that, and it's still hard. I do this thing. It's kind of probably old fashioned, but I literally walk off the stage if somebody else closes, and I go to the front door and I shake hands as people leave. I don't stay out there the whole time in between service. I'll shake hands for 5 or 10 minutes, then I go prepare for the next service. But then afterwards, the second service, I do the same thing, just because I want to connect with people. I feel like people. We live in a celebrity culture, and I don't ever want to I'm not trying to build my name to be a celebrity pastor, but at the same time, I think some pastors go to their office and they don't ever really build that relationship. And I think people just they don't need to know your phone number even, but they just want to know, hey, I got to talk to my pastor today. I got to shake his hand, that kind of thing. So. Yeah,
so I think that you mentioned the celebrity pastor.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, like, it's a thing.
Right.
And there's this glamour of kind of like having a name and having a size. So for those that are pastoring in small cities, right, small town America, what do you lean on? How do you fight that?
Yeah. Well, the truth is, if you're growing up a preacher's kid, I understood when we went to eat lunch, for instance, on a Sunday. Me and my mom would sit there and look at each other. My dad would go around and shake hands with everybody at the restaurant. Not everybody, but everybody he knew at the restaurant. So we're sitting there just waiting to order until he finally sits back down. So I grew up in a family, in a dad that was very well known in our community. And so that part, for me, just that kind of comes natural as far as just, talking to people, those kind of things. I can't hardly go to grocery store, anywhere you don't see somebody, that you know. I think part of it is, though, part of it is being honest, because the truth is, the more people you know, I think in a lot of ways, the Bible says he who has friends must show himself friendly. And the more friends you have, the more people expect you to, certain things. So I think for me, it's being realistic about it. I think everybody likes the idea of being a celebrity pastor until you realize I can't go anywhere without people talking to you. And so I think it's one of those things that keeps you also at a place of humility, because I realize, number one, I think for me, it's always not being not trying to make fun of myself all the time, but it's also just realizing, I'm just a normal person, and all of us are. And I think if we're not careful, we try to get this, go to our head, look at me, people know me. The truth is, I try to be realistic. If I lived in Oklahoma City, not everybody would know me like they do in Purcell. And so I think being realistic in a small town that, you may be kind of a big shot there, but the truth is, you drive 30 minutes, people probably don't know who you are. So I think it's just being realistic and not letting it go to your head, part of it, and just realizing, but also with, attention and all that comes responsibility that, people want your time and attention. And so I think it's just being kind of realistic and not letting it get to the place of your ego where you think you're somebody because of that.
Yeah, one thing we talked about this morning was that, when you're in a large town,
Right.
large city, even Oklahoma City or LA, Dallas, often, you're just one of these many, 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 many people, right?
Right.
But like in these small towns in America, you can kind of own the place.
Sure.
Right, and you can really make a huge difference, not just within the walls of your church, but in the entire city.
Right.
By being in the Rotary Club, being part of the city council, all of these things that you can really make a big difference in your entire community, and not just within your own church. And so I just love that thought of just, hey, we can really make a huge difference.
Right. Yeah, kind of the idea you can be it's easier to be a big fish in a small pond than it is to be, a small fish in a big pond. Because if you go to, I can now, the grace of God, who knows what would happen if I was in Oklahoma City. I'm not limiting what God would do, but I also recognize that, in 12 years we've been able to affect the kind of change, and a lot of it's because we're in a small community. And I encourage pastors, get out. If you're in a small community, go. I mean, I'm not saying I go to Norman to shop or whatever. I mean, there's a mall here, or we go to grocery shopping here some. But do a lot of stuff in your community. Go out to eat in your community. Go grocery shopping. Go to basketball games. Go to football games. Just be seen. I think there's something about that. Just being able to be seen and realize, hey, I'm one of you. I'm here just like you are. And I think people can relate to that better in a small community.
So you've grown a ton in your church. What were some of those strategic things that you've done to go? You've had to change a bunch, obviously, to go from 40 with just you.
Right.
To now 400, 2 services, staff members, new location. What were some of those mile markers, those things that you changed along the way?
Right. I think, when we began to kind of bump up against the 200 barrier, for me, it was realizing the way I led had to be different. That, once again, I'm very relational. When I was single, the most minute surgery somebody had, I was at the hospital with them. It could be something where they were there 15 minutes, but I was going to run by there and pray with them. As much as I love doing that kind of stuff, I realize I can't do it. Now, we're still in a small town. Maybe not every pastor does this. I still do hospital visits, but once again, it has to be some different things because of, if it's a major thing, I'm there. But part of it's just realizing that I had to delegate some things, that my leadership style had to change. And so for us, it was adding staff members. When I first started, like you said, it was me. Saturday nights, I'd be over there flipping bulletins in the copier to do front and back. Old school, copy the front, flip it over, copy the back. I'm folding bulletins. And then we added a administrative assistant 2 days a week. And then, we eventually added another staff member. And you're involved in helping churches find, staff members, so you understand this. I was told this, but I never understood it. I was told if you get staff members that you can grow by so many people. I never really, when we added our first staff member, we were at about 120. And within a few months, we grew to 200.
Wow.
It was amazing how just because we had somebody else that could help take part of the pressure and the load off. And just help, and we were able to do more things. Before I had another staff member, we didn't have much video type stuff going on. Added another staff member, so for us it was adding video announcements at the time, and sermon intros and all that kind of stuff, because I had somebody else that could do that kind of stuff, and free me up to do some things that I felt like I was better at.
Yeah. And
so that really began to change, and then really just structuring for growth. It was realizing that we couldn't handle more people. We had a huge front door and back door. They would come visit, but they would never stay because we had no structure to get them volunteering, serving. We had no way of doing that. And so for us, it was finding a model where we could, really plug people in. So, connection teams and all that kind of stuff. So before it was just basically, you can go stand at the door and shake hands if you want. That was kind of it. You can go serve in our kids department. That was but now we had a flow of having that happen. And so really just structuring for that. And then we recently just added a full-time youth pastor, and he's only been on staff a couple weeks, but even just doing that, we're already seeing a bump in growth. And so I think, I encourage people, number one, I know that, it depends on the size church. Financially, I can do everything. For us, it was a process. It was, our youth pastor at one time, we had a different youth pastor, and he worked one day a week with me. And he worked for a local business that would give him one day off. So we had staff meetings that day, and we paid him for that one day. That's all we could afford at the time.
Yeah.
And so now we got a staff of 3 full-time, several part-time, and then we've got an administrative assistant that's there 4 days a week. But I think it's just, little by little. Don't try to do too much at first. Just like we talked about timing, just kind of go with it and see it happen. Some stories will be those miraculous where you grow from 100 to 500 overnight, but I think more realistically it's taking us time. But I will say this about slow and steady growth. I've noticed the slow and steady growth, they tend to stay as well. It's not this overnight thing where they all come at one time and then they go other places. It's been a slow growth, but they bought into the vision and stayed because of that as well.
Yeah. One thing I'm hearing that you've mentioned a few times too is a lot of the growth barriers were in you.
Right. Yes.
That you were the lid.
Yes. Yeah.
I want to go visit everybody.
Right.
I want to. Right, and that you actually did, like you actually wanted, and then even you said that you waited. I think it was like almost a year to go to 2 services,
right? Because
you were just, man, I want everybody in one spot,
right?
I want everybody in one room. Like I want to be able to connect with everybody.
Right.
So talk about that, kind of breaking through those even mental thought barriers within yourself.
Well, it's kind of like I always think of the children of Israel that. You want everybody to go with you that can. You want as many people. I mean, they're in the wilderness, and we want all of us to be able to do this journey together. And that's kind of, for me, just being I guess my heart is a pastor, and so I don't want to lose anybody. I don't want to, I don't want to leave sheep out there and just go on and do my own thing. I want everybody to go together. But realistically, not everybody's going to follow where God has for you next. Not everybody's going to go with you there. They don't want to. They can't handle it, whatever reason. And it was in me. It was one of the reasons we didn't go to 2 services is because I didn't want to lose a group of people of one of our rehab centers. I didn't want to lose them because they're such a vital part of what we do. But the truth is, I didn't go to them. I did kind of mention a couple times, but I never went to them and said specifically, can you tell me what service you would go to? And so I just assumed they'd go to the second one, and they have to be out by a certain time. And so, but it was funny, the first Sunday we had 2 services, they came to the early service and they've never stopped. So, we could have gone to 2 services long before that had I known that. But it was me, it was in me. I was just so scared, nervous, whatever, pulling the trigger. What is it going to look like? What is it going to do to our church? Now, we've had some people that don't, honestly, if I'm being honest, there's some people that just don't like it. They say things have changed. We don't like 2 services. We don't see you as much. And that's hard for me to hear because I'm a people person that, but I have to realize we have to do what's best for the kingdom, what's best for the majority of people, not just a few people.
Yeah, which has got to be tough.
It is tough.
But, you've got to see that the Lord's calling you to go to services,
right.
And clearly, bringing new people in.
Sure.
So, what are some of those big rock things that you guys are doing? You've talked about in the early days, your part-time guy had 1 day off, but
right.
I'm sure that those meeting schedules have changed, things like that. And so, what are some of those big rock moments, those big meetings or things that you do like every week? What are some of those?
I do believe in rest. I think that we are in such a driven culture, so much going on. So we obviously, we take off on Mondays. I told you before, it's kind of old school, but mainly because on Fridays, my mind is thinking about the weekend and my sermon, but on Mondays for some reason I can kind of shut everything off, and so for Mondays it's kind of my Sabbath, and for our staff it's that way. Office is open Tuesday through Friday, but we now have regular staff meetings every week. We meet with our bigger staff because we have some volunteer staff that we meet with on a more of a monthly basis, kind of go over everything with them. For us, it's a big planning thing every year. We do a lot of sermon planning as far as it helps me so much because we still do a Wednesday night service. Being in a small town, we still have Sunday morning, Wednesday night. So a lot of times I've got 2 different series going on. Maybe on Wednesday nights, it's more of a teaching type thing because I love evangelism, but also discipleship. So I use it for leadership and discipleship on Wednesday nights. So, but it helps me to be focused. If I don't know what if I don't have a topic I'm gonna preach about or a book of the Bible we're going through, then studying is so much, it's hard just to kind of have a broad thing. So I try to have sermon series and teaching series to kind of help me focus. So for me, it's on Tuesdays we do staff meetings. We do regular staff meetings where we just look at the calendar, go over things, look at everything. But we also do staff development. So once a month, it's more of an in-depth. We're going to spend a full day doing staff development stuff, reading a book together, whatever it is, trying to, kind of help develop our personal lives as well as people. And then for me, it's usually between my meetings, it's, studying. Thursdays are usually my big study days for Sundays. I try to have all of my scriptures and everything done, my notes done by Thursday so that the media guys can have everything. And so anyway, just helping develop. For me, I'd never been a part of a church that had a large staff. Matter of fact, the church that I pastored before, or was youth pastor at, I was about the only staff member. And so in the church growing up, my dad's church, it's a great church, but he just never had tons of staff. So nobody ever taught me how to lead staff. So it's kind of one of those things, I have to listen to a lot of podcasts. I have to try to, ask a lot of questions of people, because I want to lead our staff the right direction. So part of that is a learning process for me as well.
So you talk about reading books with your staff. Let's dive into this. I want if you can, twofold on books.
Okay.
All right. So personal staff development is one side, kind of leadership,
right.
Staff development, right? But also books that that helped you get through that season of loss.
Right.
Maybe some books that you read that helped you, or maybe some books that you recommend now on both sides of those. So kind of leadership development, personal development, staffing, whatever, and then also people who are going through seasons of loss, if you can.
Right. Yeah, one of the books, this is an older book now, but it really changed how we deal with volunteers and helping our leadership, was the book Start With Why by Simon Sinek, I believe. And that book really helped us as a staff to understand if you can give people the why, they'll buy into it better than just, I was terrible about giving them the what and the how, and here's what you need to do, here's how you're going to do it, but not really giving them the why. And that book was really revolutionary for us to start to see, okay, when we talk to people, this is what we're going to do. You have, books that have been around for years, Good to Great, Jim Collins, I believe, and books over the years. One of the books that I've read recently, and I don't even know the author's name, I should know off the top of my head, but the book is called, I believe it's Canoeing the Mountains. And it's this idea of Lewis and Clark and how they had to learn the journey that when they went back west, they didn't know what they were going to be facing. And it was a lot different than they thought, and how they had to navigate. And so that book has helped me, facing new things. How do you navigate through that? So that's been a good book, just a leadership type book. Of course, I've always been a big John Maxwell fan, just, leadership tips, those kind of things. On a just a spiritual level, as far as, I guess that's all spiritual, but you know what I mean, as far as just helping people understand things. This is going to be kind of a left field type book that people probably don't expect.
I love it.
But and it's kind of weird. They're actually making a movie about it. But one of the things that helped me right away was Jeremy Kemp's autobiography, because he lost a spouse, and I read that right after all that happened to me, and how he was able to stay the course and continue to go. And it was something that just personally for me, maybe because he was a young guy that lost a spouse, but I thought, it's something that helped me tremendously. I'm a big Eugene Peterson fan. I've always liked his books. He has a book that's not as popular as some of the other ones, but it's called A Long Obedience in the Same Direction. And that idea, the book is good, but the idea helped me more than anything with timing, that what God has called us to is faithfulness, that in the end he's going to say, well done, thou good and faithful servant, and that that my idea of ministry is the long obedience in the same direction. It's, getting up and being willing to obey God every day and follow Him. And that's something that's really, that idea has helped me just to stay the course, to be consistent, and understand that I'm going to continue to go after Him. And as I do that, it's going to help me understand things. And so anyway, I'm a big Mark Batterson fan. I love his books. We just went through, he did a recent book on blessings, and and kind of understanding that. And I took our church through that last fall. And so anyway, just those kind of books have really been good, instrumental. I know our executive pastor, connections pastor, there's some books about serving from the second seat, that idea. And I encourage anybody out there, maybe you're not the lead pastor, but maybe you're serving on staff. And I believe that you can have as much influence as the senior pastor. You don't have to be in the lead chair to have as much influence. So anything like that, I encourage people, listen to podcasts, read books about that kind of stuff, because I think, once again, your level of influence can be just as much as the senior pastor.
That's great. So, Justin, you've been through a lot in your life, lead pastoring, involved in a lot of community, new baby.
Yeah.
What are some things that you've done, or maybe you're currently doing, to help keep you renewed spiritually and emotionally and health?
Yeah. I think part of it is just, number one, being willing to get away, spend time with your family, being willing to have hobbies, whatever that is. I think everybody needs a time of recreation, a time of just relaxing. I think we have to have that. I'm, once again, a very driven person, and so it's easy for me to say yes to things on my day off. And, having a child, being more intentional about spending time at home. Last night we had kind of a family night, played games. I mean, my son's 8 weeks old, so he's not really playing games, but me and my wife, this is kind of old school. We like playing cards, Yahtzee, that kind of stuff. So it's just spending time together, in the evenings, those kind of things. I think the biggest thing is just being intentional and carving out time for that, and realizing that you have to rest, that you can't do everything. For me, I've gone overseas and preached. When all this stuff began to happen to me, I got asked to go to Columbia with the college, Southwestern Christian, and they take sports teams over. And I went over and preached, and went to Turkey and gave my story in different places. Every time I came back, I realized the church was still going without me. They missed me, I missed them. But you know what? I was gone a week, and the church survived. So part of it is just realizing it's okay as a pastor for you to take time off. It's okay for you to get away. The church is going to make it, and you're going to probably be better rested because of it.
That's great, Justin. So thank you so much for being with us today. Thanks for your time. Just so grateful for you and your ministry, what you're doing. And just thanks for sharing your insights with us today.
Well, thank you, man, for this opportunity. I love to be able to tell my story, because I wanted to help people and do what I can. And I appreciate all you do. Man, I look to you for a lot of things with young leaders especially. You're killing it with that. You're doing an amazing job just helping lead people, and all that you're doing, I think you're very beneficial to the body of Christ. I love how you're helping so many different churches. It's not just one denomination, one group. And so thank you for all that you do.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. Well, thank you for joining us on this episode. We'll be with you guys again here soon.